congratulations on Swift Horses. It's beautiful. I will start with you, Dan, and I'd love to ask you a little bit of your history with this property and this story, and what resonated for you to tell it at this time.
Sure. I've been looking for a project. I knew I wanted to make a love story, and Peter Spears, our producer, and I started looking for books and different source material. And finally, this one came our way. It was during lockdown, and I started reading it. And about halfway through it, I texted him and I said, "Oh my God, I think I found the one." And he said, "I'm reading that same book." And so it sort of seemed like fate brought it to us. We went and we reached out to Shannon Pufall, the novelist, got the option, and then started thinking about how we would adapt it. And it just kind of picked up from there. By the time lockdown was over, we had a writer, Bryce Cass, and we developed a screenplay. And we took a very sensitive, very interior novel, and gave the characters voices and made them active, and, made a story out of it. And then very quickly after that, producers got involved, and we started the very fun casting process with Daisy, and everyone joined in and attached, and in a remarkably quick succession of a short time, we had a movie going.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Daisy, would you talk a little bit about Muriel's inner life? She's a housewife of a certain time, but she has dreams and a rich, at least inner life for a while, until she can kind of more openly act on it. And would you talk about that? And then also what meeting Julius triggers in her to kind of open up?
Yeah, I mean, when I read Bryce's beautiful script and, Dan kind of came to me with the project, I fell so in love with Muriel's arc and the way the story kind of sort of explores it, especially, with the backdrop of the 1950s. And I think that meeting with Julius and is so kind of gorgeous to capture on screen, because I think we all have those people in our life that come in and completely shake up our sort of... the version of ourselves we thought we were, and who really changed the course of your life. And so her sort of relationship with Julius is sort of romantic, platonic, almost like he is this mirror to her of this world and her inner life that she sort of knows is there, but is maybe scared to explore. And but alongside that, she's with Lee, and she has a lot of love for him too, and he represents a kind of more I suppose, classic version of what she thought her life would be. And so, as the story goes on, she starts to push the boundaries. And I think that it's really fun that we sort of see that with the way she starts to gamble, and she starts to make money, and she starts to kind of, what she chooses to reveal and what she chooses to conceal is really interesting, in the way she takes back her power in that way. And then the big kind of introduction is to Sandra, and what that does to then break open her whole life in a really beautiful way. And suddenly she's like, wow, there's a whole way I could live that I didn't know was possible, and I want to, and I think that journey is just such a joy to kind of explore.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. And Sasha, I really love the community that is built in San Diego, this kind of like sapphic bar that happens in Sandra's house.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about that, playing that character who builds this community and has this found family, which of course, is so necessary?
Yeah, I think Sasha, I'm, I guess I would say I'm fortunate that I get to love women and really experience that as a part of my life, and I get to experience like the passion and the joy and the intimacy. And when I got this character, it was a no-brainer. I had to, I had to live in her, and I had to love her, and I wanted to love who she loved. And I found that to be so beautiful. And when we were talking earlier today, and, in a time where, queer people, the story is relevant, but we're so oppressed and we're hidden. Dan somehow and Bryce and Shannon like created a space, especially the bar, the bar in like book club, created a space that was so joyous. And as we've been doing interviews today, we kind of came to the conclusion that moment, I mean, all of those girls in that, all of the women in that house are themselves, and they're positive and they're happy and they're together and they're supporting one another and they're seeing each other. And I find that is such a beautiful scene, and it brings me joy to think about it.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the power of queer joy, which has to be leaned into in times of oppression.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Diego, I want to talk a little bit about, Henry, especially back at that time, being queer, is kind of, you're an outlaw, but Henry is also literally an outlaw, with kind of being on the run after the gambling kind of scheme. Would you talk a little bit about the idea of being a literal outlaw, as well as one because of, or playing this, as well as one because of their sexuality?
Well, I based Henry in, I was always thinking of a dog from the street. I think he had probably like a rough life before. I think he has like many faces. He can switch and change, depends on the situation. Yeah. But deep inside, I think he just wants to be loved. And he's very confident on that. And in this like bubble he builds with Julius, then he can be free, right? But he's very clear that Julius and him are not the same. No, he said it like, it's different for me. So at the same time, he's brave and afraid. Brave enough to run and afraid to be loved and loved.
Yeah, and he knows he deserves love. I think that's really important as well. Yeah. Dan, you've been at this a while. You've worked with Killer Films on some early important films. Shot Andy Warhol. Would you talk about the kind of importance, almost kind of revolutionary act of making this film about queer people and who are under attack, about Mexican people who are under attack, and what that means to you to be able to continue to put these stories out when it is kind of a radical act?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to Christine Vachon the other night, the head of Killer Films, and and I was sharing with her how like effusive young queer people have been coming forward after the screenings, and how they really feel possessive of this film. And I said, wow, it's like in the 90s when we made those movies and no one had done it before. I said, I hope this is like their idea of, this is their film. I think it talks about a lot of things that everyone's thinking about, about identity, sexuality, relationships. Can you love more than one person at once? In a time when it wasn't safe to do that, in a time when there weren't words to describe that. And, I think the big thing I hope for this is that it expresses how queer people will always find each other, even when you have to hide yourself. And I also think the experience for people who aren't queer is, everyone's had to hide themselves, men, women, you've had to hide who you really are to fit in. And, I think that's one of the things that's universal about these characters in their searched for their best selves. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sasha, there's that kind of scene with Muriel, and it's, I think, really layered. Has to do with class and race, and also the ability to pass as queer or not. Would you talk about how that plays into your character?
Are we talking about the fight scene?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I'm still laughing. Yeah, I think we've talked about this. I think that Sandra was so confident in herself and who she was.
Yeah.
And within that, she allowed this person to come in who didn't know who she was. And she gave her grace and safety and time. And I really loved that about her. I really loved that she just kind of allowed Muriel, was like, here you go, be yourself, and I'm here, and I will follow. And it was a beautiful thing, but then, you know, I think it came to a point where within that love that and within that bravery, she also set boundaries for herself of you know, like, and it's something that we're still dealing with, right? It's like, I am queer and this is who I am and this is my life, and loving you is real to me. And it's not a phase. It's not something that I can really control. It's my life. And she owns it, and she respects herself, and she sets that boundary. And it's also so brave, because I do feel that within that, I think Sandra was falling for Muriel. And it's a brave thing to set a boundary to someone that you love with the potential of losing them, you know? Yeah. So yeah, complex and beautiful and all the things.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Daisy, would you talk a little bit about that scene from what you believe Muriel's perspective is? One thing I really liked about Muriel was that she seemed to be discovering herself, and she didn't have any kind of pathos or kind of regret or anything about it. At least that's how I read it. But would you talk a little bit about this relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I everything Sash just said resonates so well, I think, and I think it's also really important to show sort of the ways you can be careless with people. I think Muriel's like journey of self-discovery and journey of kind of finding out, you know, exploring that side of herself is really beautiful, but also I think she's careless with Sandra. I think she doesn't realize that, you know, how much it, you know, the stakes for her, and she's sort of like, yeah, that moment where she sort of says like, oh, she talks about how she's being so careless with Lee as well. I think she's just, it's important that, you know, you depict that story of a young person in their 20s finding, you know, finding out who they are, but also when you are that young and you are doing that, you can be careless and it can be messy. And I think it's really beautiful that that's a learning moment for Muriel. I think she doesn't realize that the hurt she's causing and it's confusing, but suddenly it's also really important that she realizes she has to be mindful of that. And she also loves Sandra too. I really think that, but she also loves Lee, and she loves Julia. So she's figuring it out. Yeah.
Thank you, Diego. Would you talk a little bit about building this love story with Jacob? There are a lot of scenes of just the two of you, and they're funny and vulnerable and sexy. Would you just talk a little bit about telling this really beautiful love story with Jacob?
Well, I think first of all, you need to feel safe, right? To build that kind of relationship and to be able to play and to make it fun, you know, and to enjoy it. And I think it was Jacob, Dan, and me. It was the three of us trying to find the scene and try to make it new every time and make it fun. And most of all, it's like their castle, right? Their bubble, so they're supposed to be free. And Jacob is such a dedicated actor. He's just too tall. That was the only difficulty.
And Will's really tall.
Will's really
Everyone's
tall.
you're pretty
Diego,
tall.
you're so tall too.
No, but you know, Tortico is like trying to kiss you.
Well, it's a good thing there were so many scenes on the bed then.
Nice.
Thank you.
So good.
Dan, would you talk a little bit about the look of this film? I mean, it really comes off like it feels very vintage and of a time, although its themes are incredibly modern.
Yeah, the look of it was important to me because, you know, we've all seen films that are pretending to be a film made in the 1950s. This one, I really wanted to put the emotion forward. and we wanted to be free with the camera. And for example, in the intimate scenes with Henry and Julius in the hotel room, we're always handheld. You may not notice it, but I hope you feel it. Same in the scenes with Muriel and Sandra. When they're alone in the house and they're dancing, the camera's dancing with them. I wanted to, look for those moments of joy and levity, that these people had together and try to express it. We didn't look at films, and we looked at films in a historic way, like what was the most, important film of the time. And, I particularly love Picnic, the William Inge one with Kim Novak and William Holden, and All Fall Down, which is a little bit later with Warren Beatty and Eva Marie Saint. But those, we weren't going to imitate those. So what we did instead was we looked at a lot of documentary and journalistic photography from the time. And actually I gave some of the actors books from, different photographers who felt relevant, like Bruce Davidson, who photographed gangs and greasers, and Gordon Parks, the amazing journalistic photographer and filmmaker who did color photography from the time, and then paintings of domestic scenes and that were made by artists in the time. So the cinematographer, Luc Montpellier, and I really looked at those things and kind of just absorbed it all. And then we just followed them. We just followed the actors, and we let that guide us rather than some very strict, kind of language of films of the 50s. We really just wanted to tell the story of these people. So that's where we took our inspiration.